This really happened to me, and I still feel the pinch of it in my ribs when I climb the subway stairs by J Street Metrotech. I'm telling it now because the smallest details, like the cold of a brass stanchion under my fingertips, haven't faded. "You're not on the guest list," the planner said, and the clipboard she clutched scraped against the marble at the entrance of the Dumbo venue like a tiny guillotine. The lobby smelled like gardenias and champagne, and through the glass I could see my son's wedding party posing beneath a neon sign. I had flown in early to steam his tie and bring him the cufflinks that belonged to my father, but the woman in a black jumpsuit with perfect hair didn't even look up again. She just angled her body like a doorstop and dismissed me as if I'd come to crash a stranger's night. Behind her, my ex-husband's new wife touched the planner's wrist and smiled, and my humiliation landed clean and hard. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. I pressed my palms against the edge of the welcome table to keep from shaking. The table was dressed with a linen runner and a scattering of votives. There was a gold-rimmed frame listing the signature drinks that I had paid for, the Old Brooklyn for the groom, the Vespa for the bride. "I'm his mother," I said, quietly enough not to be a scene, but with that old steel of mine that had negotiated union bids and lease build-outs in my 30s. "I'm on the list." The planner, Kendall I would learn, lifted a single brow. "Please step aside, ma'am. We're at capacity, and the bride has requested a calm environment." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Security?" I remember the bounce of the rope against my hip when I backed away. The security guard was younger than my son, and he looked tired and sorry. Inside, bridesmaids in satin drifted like peonies on green stems. I watched my ex-husband, Martin, put his hand on my son's shoulder for the photographer, watched my son glance around and not see me, and then I was out on Water Street with my purse clutched to my chest like a small animal, the East River throwing cold air against my face. I walked to Brooklyn Bridge Park and sat on a bench by the granite steps where tourists take pictures. I'm 58 years old, and I'm the kind of woman who keeps stamps in her wallet and a length of floral wire in the glove compartment because you never know when something will need mending. I had made the rehearsal dinner happen, even when the caterer's van got a flat on the BQE. I had paid deposits when the bride's father's card had a glitch, and I had taken the high road when my ex-husband said maybe I should keep my toast brief and neutral because, "Nora, we don't want to dredge up history." I had been useful, polite, careful, but that night, on that bench, I understood something simple and mean. Someone wanted me gone. I texted my son, "Jake, I'm at the door. They say I'm not on the list." I waited 5 minutes, then 10. Then the read receipt appeared, and nothing else. I typed again, erased it, and found that my hands wouldn't stop trembling, like they couldn't differentiate a phone from the brass of a chafing dish. I put the phone away. I watched a ferry slide past, and I did what I have done my whole life when someone tells me I don't belong. I started taking inventory. The bride's mother had cried at the tasting at Balthazar. The planner had placed a linen napkin over the woman's wrist like a sympathy bandage and said, "We'll make it perfect." The invoice from the lighting vendor had been triple the quote, and when I questioned it, I received a chirpy email that said, "Oh, our premium package was pre-selected by the coordinator. It's standard for events at Crown and Ash." Crown and Ash was the venue, a converted brick warehouse tucked between the Manhattan Bridge stanchion and a coffee roaster. The contract had a clause about preferred vendor coordination fees, and I'd asked about it at the walkthrough. "It keeps quality consistent," the planner said, and her assistant in white sneakers took a picture of the bar back and said, to no one in particular, "This will be sick for reals." I put my fingers ready on those seams and tugged. I texted my sister who lives in Park Slope and knows how to keep a secret like a winter coat, tight and warm. "I'm locked out." She sent 3 angry faces and then, "Want me to come?" I said no. I wasn't going to make my son's wedding night about me. I was going to take this indignity somewhere quieter and chew it into iron, and then I was going to find out who had cut my name away and why. Because the rope had bounced against my hip like a challenge, and humiliation, I've learned, can be either a leash or a fuse. By the time a car splashed past and the air shifted to that late-hour damp, I had a plan with the bones of a bridge and the mind of a storm. The first step was simple. I would find the paper trail that had erased me, and I would pull it like a magician's scarf until the whole table came apart. The next morning I went back to the block on J Street where the venue's office had a little brass plaque, and I asked to see the manager. The receptionist's nails were the precise mauve of an expensive rose. "Do you have an appointment?" she said, and then she looked at my shoes, which were sensible, not chic. "Tell them Nora Quinn is here to correct an error," I said, and the tone in my voice found the old part of me that used to audit vendor ledgers for fun. She slid her eyes to the calendar, bit her lip, and then went to get someone. The someone was a man in a navy suit with a tie woven like a river. "Nora," he said. "I'm Tate. I run operations at Crown and Ash. How can I help?" I told him, briefly, coolly, because heat is fuel, and I needed to be careful about what I burned through. The corners of his mouth tightened when I said the planner's name. He offered me coffee, and then offered me a seat in a glass-walled conference room that smelled like lemon oil and old paper. The receptionist placed a glass of water like a prop in front of me. When Tate came back, he had a printout of the guest list. My name wasn't on it. My sister's was. My ex-husband's new wife's Pilates partner was. "It's odd," Tate said. "The couple submitted a revised list 48 hours ago. The planner sent it." "Who approved it?" I asked. "The couple," Tate said, but suddenly he was looking at the glass tabletop, not my face. "We rely on the coordinator for final confirmations." I asked for a copy of every invoice paid through the venue's vendor portal that had my son's names on it. "I can't," Tate said, and then he could, because I mentioned a charge on my own card, and because I said I would sit there until I had what I needed, and because he recognized maybe a parent's sorrow when he saw it. It took 2 hours and 3 trips to the printer. When I left, I went around the corner to a cafe on Front Street and lined up the papers like tiles. I read every line, circle by circle, until my coffee went cold and the afternoon poured in. There was a coordination fee I'd already noticed, but there was also a preferred vendor rebate that looked like money out and then money back in. It wasn't a discount to the couple. It was a payment to the planner's LLC. There was a lighting charge that echoed the one I'd challenged, routed through a different name. There was an honorarium to a stylized acronym I didn't recognize. I Googled it. The address was a UPS store on Court Street. My stomach tightened like a rosebud. I called the number on the planner's website and got a voicemail with the chirp of insincerity. I didn't leave a message. Instead, I called a florist I knew from when I used to do event work, before I shifted to small commercial property investments in Queens and Brooklyn, the little brownstones that I had loved back into usefulness. "Kay," I said when she answered, "tell me how the preferred vendor program at Crown and Ash works." There was a silence filled with the sound of tissue paper. "Nora," she said carefully, "we'll talk in person, not over the phone." We met at a donut shop on Washington Street. Kay's hands were nicked with rose thorns and glue. "You didn't hear this from me," she said, which is how every true story in New York begins. "They take 20% from vendors for the cousin list. If you're not on the list, you don't get the work. Sometimes they bump your quote to hide the skim. Sometimes the coordinator invoices separately." She glanced toward the door. "You didn't hear that from me." "Why didn't anyone say anything?" I asked. "Because," she said, and she touched the place inside her elbow that had gone tender from carrying buckets. "If you tell, you don't work, and rents don't care if you're honest." I went home to my one bedroom in Clinton Hill, which is furnished like a person who grew up poor and never got over owning a good chair. I put the papers on my kitchen counter and thought about every decision in my life that had been explained away by men in ties. I thought about my son, who had texted me at 2 a.m. to say, "Mom, I'm so sorry the planner said you left early. I didn't see my phone till late. Please forgive us, we're so tired." I didn't respond. I was past brittle apologies. I wanted the truth. And the truth, in my experience, lives in the quiet ledger entries and the way a person's voice shifts when they're cornered. That's when I called my lawyer. Alma Reyes is the kind of attorney who looks like she's going to a parent-teacher conference and eats people alive. We met 15 years ago when a contractor tried to ghost me after taking a deposit to demo a storefront on Myrtle Avenue. Alma had found the man's mother and served her on a Sunday. "You have two problems," she said now, eating a container of strawberries like a prosecutor with a prop. "One is personal, one is structural." "I want both," I said. "And you do still want to be in your son's life?" she asked, not unkindly. "Yes," I said. "I do, which is why I'm not going to blow his marriage up. I'm going to take the rot out of the building." Alma leaned back. "All right, Nora, tell me how deep you want to dig." I told her, and when I finished, she laughed once, sharp and pleased, the way a person laughs when someone finally stops asking for permission. We started with public records. In New York State, if you know where to look, you can spend a day in front of a computer and pull the stitching out of an entire empire. The venue, Crown and Ash, was leased by an operator, not owned. Title records put the building under an LLC with a long, forgettable name, J63 Holdings, LLC. There were UCC filings that hinted at construction financing still on the books. There was a property tax delinquency that looked small until Alma pointed out the interest rate inside it, which made my blood hum. There was an outstanding DOB violation for an egress stair that had been temporarily approved 2 years ago and never finalized. Sloppy. Sloppy in a way that eventually costs. "Someone needs cash," Alma said, tracing the lien with her finger like a treasure map. "Or we'll need it soon." "And the planner?" I asked. "Registered in Delaware, of course," Alma said. "But their vendor payments touch New York. And the way they're moving money?" She tapped the honorarium. "This smells like bait and grease. We get a couple of other victims, clients, on paper, and we could put their whole structure on notice. It would be persuasive." I didn't sleep much that week. I listened to the plumber 2 floors down knock at pipes that had been old when my mother still wore stockings. I took long walks down to the Navy Yard and watched ferries nose after the wake of tugboats like children chasing older siblings. I wrote down names, I listened, and then I set the trap. I called the planner's office as a different person. I have a voice I keep for stores that pretend returns aren't policy. I told them I worked for a hedge fund that wanted a product launch gala. Nothing crazy, just 200 guests, and a celebrity DJ in late spring. I used an LLC I own for a laundromat on DeKalb as the contracting party and a prepaid number. The planner sent over a preferred vendor list and a bespoke curation fee that was essentially a bribe with a fragrance. We went back and forth on bespoke details until the number was big enough to make it worthwhile. When the email came with wiring instructions to the planner's LLC, I was at the bank with Alma on speaker and a teller who called me Ms. Quinn, like I was a secret. We wired the deposit, the receipt came back, and then came a second email, 4 minutes later, with instructions to route the lighting and floral deposits to 2 other LLCs, those stylized acronyms again. "For internal allocation," the assistant wrote. "Got you," I whispered to the air like I was talking to the pipes. We waited, we documented. And then, when the planner scheduled a walkthrough and sent me a VIP welcome packet with a letterhead that would look good in court, Alma filed a complaint with the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection and sent a demand letter to the operator of Crown and Ash regarding deceptive practices and kickback arrangements. A copy went to the building owner's LLC, certified, with a cover note that said, "You have a problem inside your walls that is going to cost you tenants." 2 days later, Tate called me from a number I didn't recognize. "Nora," he said, and the smoothness of his phone voice had been scuffed. "I wish you had come to us first." "I did," I said. "You gave me printouts." He exhaled. "Can we meet?" We met in a coffee shop near Borough Hall. Tate didn't order anything. "This comes from the coordinator," he said, choosing his words. "We don't police third-party vendor agreements. The planner brings us a lot of business." "Which is another way of saying you won't bite the hand that feeds you," I said, gently enough that he wouldn't flinch. "We're adjusting policies," he said feebly. "You'll adjust faster in front of a judge," Alma said, appearing at my shoulder with 2 coffees and a crescent of a smile. That weekend, I rode the A train to the courthouse at 360 Adams Street and watched couples in love carry envelopes like offerings, and I stood on the steps long enough to understand the rhythms of a city that has never loved the poor or the polite. I was neither anymore, and that clarity is a kind of adrenaline. I wanted something more than a fine. I wanted the structural piece, the beam you pull, the load shifts, the whole story rewrites itself. Alma, it turns out, loves an auction. "There's a tax lien sale coming up," she said, laying out the notice like tarot. J63 Holdings is on the list. This is not for the faint of heart, Nora. You buy the lien, you don't own the building. You own the right to a very messy fight. "I rebuild messes," I said. "It's what I do." "And you're liquid enough to play?" I thought about the years, the laundromats and the cell phone shops, and the way I had learned to say, "No, we pay in 30 days," and to say, "We'll eat the cost," when a tenant's kid broke a window and they were already late, and about the 10-year note I'd finally retired last summer for a storefront that had nearly eaten me in 2012. I had savings, I had equity, I had 3 offers on a little building in Ridgewood that I could snap into cash if I needed to. "Yes," I said, and my voice didn't shake. We prepared. Alma taught me how to sit in a room full of men who use checks as weapons and act like you're choosing tomatoes. We set a ceiling, and then we set a backup ceiling. I got a cashier's check heavy enough to feel like a stone in my purse. I wore the good shoes. When the day came, the room smelled like old coffee and dust. Numbers went in the air and came down with a slap. My lot number arrived like a dare. There were 3 bidders. 2 were there to make quick work. 1 decided to play with the woman with gray in her hair, maybe for sport. We moved in little bids, then longer ones. I smiled once, not at anyone. When it hit my ceiling, I waited, and the man smirked at the pause. He raised his finger like a maestro. I raised my hand. The room tilted. Alma was stone beside me. "Sold!" the auctioneer barked a minute later, and the sound shot through me. My body knew before my brain did. A door had just opened a few inches in a building where I'd been told I didn't belong. That night I walked past Crown and Ash and stood across the street. The windows were lit up, and inside a birthday dinner glittered, and a planner in a black jumpsuit set a menu on the head table as if she was placing a verdict. The game was on, and I was no longer outside the rope. What I had bought was leverage, and leverage, I've learned, needs to be applied precisely or you break your own wrists. Alma set a calendar that was tight enough to sing. We sent notice to the building owner's agent, a schedule of redemption, interest accruing by the day, the liens they hadn't noticed. A woman like me would dare buy. We copied the operator, the people who ran Crown and Ash on paper and air kisses. We copied the bank that had a blanket UCC filing still on the public index. We copied the planner's general inbox for the pleasure of it. 3 days later, someone's lawyer who smelled like cologne called Alma to say we were being vexatious. Alma said, sweet as simple syrup, "We prefer the word meticulous." I sat in her office, legs crossed, listing every couple we'd collected who'd been hit by preferred vendor adjustments. We had 6 by then. 2 had paid to silence their rage. 1 had filed a complaint and been ignored. 1 was a public school teacher who'd cried because she had already pushed her family beyond what they could comfortably give. We scheduled a town hall at a bar in Fort Greene that I own a piece of, cash bar, meeting in the back room next to the dartboard. I told Alma I wanted it to feel like an AA meeting, but for people who had been told weddings should be shamefully expensive and that it was their fault for not being wealthy enough to enjoy the gouge. They came with manila folders and tiny, contained fury. The bartender, a woman with Haori tattoos, poured quieter than I'd ever heard her pour. This isn't only about money, I told them. It's about being told you don't belong at your own celebration. It's about being told you're not on the list. Heads nodded. People don't want to burn down their weddings. They want their dignity back. The planner, Kendall, posted a reel that week of champagne coupes clinking and a bride lifting a veil with a caption about curating joy. The comments were full of hearts and flames. I watched it and felt something. Not anger now, not even the acid that had licked the back of my throat on Water Street. I felt clarity. They believed they were untouchable because they had a gate. I wasn't bringing wire cutters. I was buying the gate. There are quieter parts in a war like this, and in those quiet parts, you hear the things that will decide the outcome. Tate called again. Nora, he said more careful now. We should talk. We are talking, I said. You've been served. You have a schedule. You have a planner who is bleeding you in daylight. We can fix this, he said. We can adjust the program and you can replace the coordinator immediately, I said, and you can escrow the vendor rebates in a fund for your couples now. And you can schedule a meeting with the owner of J63 Holdings so they can discuss redemption with me before this gets very expensive. Silence. Then, Nora, may I be frank? Please, I said. It will be a novelty. Your son's wedding, we were told. A pause, a swallow. We were told you preferred to sit out the ceremony. My breath left me in a controlled, precise way. By whom? Kendall. Tate's voice cleaned up suddenly, like someone else had entered the room. She said you didn't want to attend, that you had history that would make you uncomfortable. I let the silence sit there. A weapon needs weight. My son texted me at 2 a.m., apologizing because he knew it was wrong, I said, which means someone told him a lie about me that he wanted to believe for convenience, which means that person needed me invisible. Nora, Tate said, we will send an apology. I don't want an apology, I said. I want you to let me in the building. There is a point where a bully understands they've misjudged the field. It is a tiny change in posture. It is a shift in grammar. It is the moment their eyes lower to the table as their hand moves to cover the thing that can be taken. Tate said softly, will you meet with the owner? We met in a conference room at a midtown law firm overlooking 6th Avenue. The owner, a man who resembles a bar of soap in a good suit, came with counsel. Alma came with a file as thick as a geode and a cardigan that made her look deceivingly kind. We spoke of the lien. We spoke of redemption. We spoke of the operator and of the planner and of the way influence wears a pretty dress and calls itself industry standard. If you're smart, you'll redeem now, Alma said, and you'll authorize the tenant to terminate their arrangement with the coordinator. We can't, the operator blurted, then shut his mouth like a fish. Can't or won't? I asked. The coordinator brings in 60% of our events, he said to the window, as if the skyline would say he was brave. And how many of those events leave money on the table in a way that can be construed as deceptive? Alma asked, voice so gentle it ached. Because I have 6 stories, and a reporter at Gothamist has 2 more that I didn't even touch. The owner's counsel made soothing noises. Perhaps a private resolution. I'm a mother, I said, and I let the words fill the afternoon like music. I want something public. I looked at the owner. There's another option. He waited, wary as a deer. You sell me the building. Alma didn't even swallow. She kept her eyes on the counsel like a cat with a red dot. The owner performed the ritual of a person pretending he'd never consider such a thing. The market, the structure, the complexity of a sale. Alma said, the tax lien will gain interest daily. The vendor claims will multiply. The Whisper Network has already adopted a shout. Your operator will beg you to keep a rotten arrangement in place because it floats their calendar. At some point, your lender will ask annoying questions. I slid a piece of paper across the table with a number that was not insulting and not generous. The number had 3 quiet friends behind it, financing a employee could pull from, and assets I could liquidate if I had to. The owner looked at it and did not blink. Counsel said, "We'll discuss." Alma said, "Do that quickly." While they discussed, I closed another loop. I asked my son to coffee in Cobble Hill. He came alone and looked younger than his ring made him. "Mom," he said, his shoulders rising to his ears, the way they did when he was 5 and had broken the blue cereal bowl he loved. "I'm sorry." "I'm not here for an apology," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. "I'm here to tell you 2 truths. One is that a person you trusted lied about me, and you let them because it made your life easier. That's a mistake. The second is that I'm taking care of it." He grimaced. "Mom, please don't." "I'm not embarrassing you," I said. "I'm correcting a thing inside a wall so other people don't get hurt. That includes you. That includes your wife." He blinked. What are you doing?" "Fixing the building," I said. "And when it's fixed, if you want a room to have dinner with your mother and father and cousins without any planners instructed to keep it calm, you'll have one." He studied his hands. "I should have come to the door," he said, so quiet I could barely hear him. I looked at my phone and thought, maybe she decided not to. Maybe someone saved me from drama. "Drama?" I said, and I could feel the old heat bloom then, the mother heat that can hold a fever with nothing but a cool washcloth and fury. "Drama is choosing escalation over conversation. I sent you a text asking for help. The rest, that was someone else's performance you paid for." He nodded, a kid again, a man again. Will you tell me where to show up?" "Yes," I said, "but not yet." The building owner came back like a man who'd seen the end of the show during intermission. "We'll sell," he said, "with conditions." "Of course," Alma said, her teeth small and bright. The contract moved faster than it had any right to. There are times when New York acts like it wants to help you. It's just making sure you've earned it. The agreed price would only work if I liquidated the building in Ridgewood, but I had an offer already, and the buyers, a young couple who wanted to open a bakery on the corner, were ready. We moved like we were hungry. Closing was scheduled for a Friday in late May. I had a cashier's check the size of a daydream and a wire set for the rest. When we walked out of the title company's office on Madison Avenue, Alma patted the folder like it was a sleeping cat. "You understand," she said, "what you can do now?" "I think so," I said, and the light off a bus window flashed across us like a camera. It's one thing to own a building on paper. It's another to walk into it knowing the floorboards know your name. I chose a day when the planner had a tasting scheduled. I wore a navy dress and my mother's ring. I stopped in the lobby at the same welcome table where the rope had thumped my hip. The brass was warm. The florist, the same one who had done my son's ceremony, was arranging hellebores in low bowls, and when she saw me, she looked away so fast she knocked over a votive. I picked it up. "It's all right," I said. Then I stepped to the host stand and said, "Can you ask the coordinator to come out, please?" Kendall emerged the way a swan arrives at a pond, already gliding. "We don't do drop-bys," she said, not bothering to feign surprise. Her eyes scanned for the clipboard. "If you have a tasting, it's on the calendar." "I do," I said. "For later." I smiled. "But I'm early." "We don't have staff to—" "You will," I said, and set the folder down like a meal. Deed, closing statements, notices of termination for any arrangement between the operator and any third-party coordinator, pending new agreements to be executed by the owner. A letter rescinding Crown and Ash's preferred vendor policy in favor of transparent bidding. A memo to staff explaining that any retaliation for honesty would be grounds for termination. Kendall's face did a flicker, a very human thing, and then smoothed back. "This is very cute, she said. "You have a printout." "I have a building," I said, "and now I'm telling you to leave it." The operator, who had been hovering, stepped in with a lawyerly cough. "We have contracts," he said. "You had contracts," Alma said, appearing at my shoulder like I'd conjured her. "Most of them violated the lease and several consumer protection statutes. You're on a new floor plan now." She smiled. "I adore a new floor plan." Security drifted near, not unkindly, as if we were all, together, deciding how a play should end. Staff watched while pretending to look at screens. Tate stood with his weight on his toes like he might run. "You can't do this," Kendall said. "You'll never fill this calendar without me. I can take 5 venues down in a weekend with one story on my page." "Probably," I said. "But here's the thing. I don't want your version of full. I want fair. And I'm not selling joy. I'm renting a room. Those are different businesses." She laughed, a beautiful sound shaped like a blade. "You'll be calling me in a week." I shook my head. "No, we're done." She looked around once, performing the move of a woman who believes the crowd is on her side, and then she saw, I think, how tired everyone was. The assistant with the white sneakers had a hand pressed in at her ribs like a stitch in her side. The dishwasher peered from the kitchen, eyes hopeful, as if we were discussing whether the shift would end early. Tate straightened his tie like an apology. No one moved to rescue her. "Fine," she said finally, with a little flourish, like she was leaving before she was asked. She lifted her clipboard. "I built this place." "Funny," I said softly, so only she and I could hear it. "Because I own it." She walked past me with her chin up and her steps too sharp. When the door shut, I heard an exhale through the whole staff like air escaping a jar. We spent the afternoon undoing knots. I met with the line cooks and the dishwashers and the servers, quiet meetings in the staff room where the vending machine hummed like a refrigerator in a small apartment. We wrote a new vendor policy together. We posted it publicly in the front window next to the menus, where the real customers could read it and where couples could take pictures with their parents without a coordinator's hand on their elbow. I asked the floral person, Kay's assistant in fact, to send me a list of the vendors who had been pushed out by the preferred policy. We called them and invited them back. I told the staff about a fund the building now had for couples who had been overcharged. When one of the prep cooks started to cry, she turned around and made it look like she was searching for plastic wrap. But I wasn't done. I set a date for a gathering 1 month later. It was not a party and not a protest. It was a dinner, and we called it what it was. The invitation read, "You're on the list." We invited every couple we had met. We invited staff. We invited the neighborhood. We invited my son and his wife. We did not invite any planners. We held it on a Sunday, before sunset, when the light off the East River makes the room feel like it's floating. The night of the dinner, I wore a suit I'd owned for 20 years and new earrings that made me feel brave. I stood at the welcome table. I touched the brass because I could. A young hostess, who'd applied that week, drawn by the fact that we posted salaries, stood with a pencil and an iPad and a smile that belonged to her. People arrived. They were uncertain first, because there is nothing more intimate than someone else's attempt to make it right. The bar poured the Old Brooklyn and the Vespa, because a name can be reclaimed if you want it badly enough. Staff started to sway to the slow music a dishwasher had chosen off his phone, and I watched my city relax around the edges. Then my son came in. He looked for me like he used to when he was 8 and the skating rink was chaotic, and he needed to know which way to turn. I raised my hand. The bride, my daughter-in-law, stood beside him, tense and embarrassed and brave, all at once. "Mrs. Quinn," she said, breathless. "Welcome," I said, and meant it. "Can we help?" she blurted. "Yes," I said. "Can you go to that table and tell that woman in the blue dress she looks beautiful tonight? I think she needs to hear it from someone young." She laughed then, surprised into herself. "Okay." For 2 hours, the room was what it should have been for us all along. The staff ate before their shift ended. The couples brought their parents, who took pictures not to post, but to remember. I sat for a minute at the end of the bar and felt the building settle like a horse after a long day. And then, of course, the story tried to reclaim itself. The doors swung open. Kendall walked in with a photographer already lifting a camera, as if the world were waiting to be told how to feel about this moment. She was what power looks like when it's been told no. Shiny, furious, hungry for endorsement. "I'm here to see my space," she said, because bullies returned to where they last got applause. I stood. I didn't have to. It was my building, but I wanted to, because my legs had something to say. "You're not on the list," I said, and I let the words sit. Then I smiled, because I am not interested in theater for its own sake, and because I had already written the ending. No cameras tonight, no content, just people. I pointed to the door, and the security guard, who used to look tired and now looked like he slept, opened it. "Good night, Kendall?" She stared at me for a long breath. The photographer lowered the camera without instruction. In the window I could see our reflections, her sleek and perfect, me in my suit with my mother's ring, and for a second I thought of every woman who has ever had to build a room around a door that wouldn't open, because the other way was to die from 1,000 polite cuts. Then she left. My son came to me later with a plate in his hand and a question in his eyes. "Mom," he said, his voice sheepish and full, "do we get a do-over?" "Yes," I said, "but not a do-over of the wedding, a do-over of the dinner afterward, the part with the people who will still be there in 10 years. I looked around the room, the dishwashers, the bartenders, the couples who'd survived planning. "And maybe," I said, "a do-over of how we treat the people who aren't on our lists until we make the lists big enough." We clinked glasses, we ate the cake, and when the lights went low, the staff danced, not because it would look good on anyone's phone, but because there was music and room. Weeks later, the lawsuit settled. The fund paid out. The owner was gone. The operator humbled. The staff paid better. The vendor policy changed other venues slowly, the way one window in a neighborhood turns on earlier and makes the street feel safer. I got calls from places I didn't own, asking how to replicate it. I told them to start with a whiteboard and a marker and a promise. And then, late one day in June, Tate knocked on my office door. "Your 4 o'clock is here," he said. "The woman who runs that foster program in Red Hook, she wants to do their holiday fundraiser here in December. Tell her—" "Yes," I said. "Tell her we'll waive the fee if she lets a couple of our line cooks apprentice at her program's kitchen." He smiled. "You're not like the other owners," he said, not as flattery, but as an observation. "I've been on the other side of the rope," I said. "It changes you." That night I walked out onto Water Street and stood in the same spot where I had once held my purse, like a wounded thing. The river breathed, the bridge hummed, the city threw its light and shadow and asked as it always does, "Who are you now?" I'm a woman who was told she wasn't on a list and bought the building instead. That sounds smug in the telling. It felt more like a long, necessary repair. I'm someone's mother. I'm someone's landlord. I'm the person who fixes the hinge because no one else will, and because a door that won't open is an insult waiting to be weaponized. People still send me reels of planners spinning champagne fountains in slow motion, and I sometimes watch with a neutrality that used to be hate. I don't sell romance. I own square footage. I maintain plumbing and dignity, which is the only infrastructure that matters in a city like this. When a couple comes into the office and the groom's father looks at me like he wants to ask if I'll work with the coordinator, I say, "We'll work with honest people." It is enough. And when I walk by the welcome table on a busy night, sometimes I pause and touch the brass. It reminds me of cold against skin and of the way humiliation turned to resolve on a bench by the river. Somewhere out there, another woman is being told she isn't on a list in a room she helped pay for. I hope she buys the room, or the building, or just the pen, because this is what I learned. In New York, the lists are real, but the rooms are made by people, and people can decide, quietly and forever, who gets to stand inside. They line ending.